Hi, Lara here, and today I am sharing my third page in my August Artistry journal. Now, I am a little bit behind. The idea of this challenge was to sort of do 5 pages a week in this little journal using some prompts. However, this is only my third and we're now in the second week. But they're still a lot of fun to play with, and I'm enjoying putting this process together. So what I'm going to play with today is some little ink cubes, and I'm going to just sort of smear these across the page and squirt them with a bit of water. The page that I've chosen to work on in the junk journal is the sort of scratch paper that I often use, that I put in here that had been used, and all I've done is just gone across and smeared these little ink cubes across them and squirted them with water each time. And because it's really wet, I'm just now using my heat tool just to dry them up. So squirting it, using the heat tool at the back of the paper helps to dry it up that little bit more as well. And I'm liking what this came up with. Now, as this sort of page came together, it's nothing sort of like I anticipated. I was sort of thinking nice clean page with a little bit of perhaps some slow stitching and stuff on it, and I thought I'd just use this left hand side page, but things sort of change and evolve, and that's kind of what I like about this wee journal. There's nothing perfect, nothing has to be spot on. It's just for me. There's no sort of design team expectations behind it. It's just a little bit of fun to play with ideas. And as I was exploring some of these ideas, I'm like, oh, that would be quite fun to do on a scrapbook page, or that would be cool on a card. So it's a nice wee sort of experimental journal, using bits and pieces. The stamp sets that I'm using here are not current, so it's using up a bit of stash, using some of those things that we've got that we often take for granted and don't use. So this was a stamp set that I was sent to use as part of the artisan design team earlier in the year, and it may or may not still be available, but it does have some really nice sort of leaves and some different foliage on here. So the theme or the prompt for this was about sounds that we hear and kind of take for granted, and I decided to play with the birds, which was actually one of the examples on the prompt, because when we first moved into the house that we live in, and that's a good or maybe 17, 18 years ago now, it was sort of a new subdivision and there wasn't Birdsong. So but over time, now that gardens have grown and we've got trees that have popped up, we hear beautiful birds, and sometimes some of our native birds like our tui we find out on the flax bush out in the front of the house as well. So I decided to sort of document those birds. I've carried on that theme here of sort of that watercolour look with the ink strips that I did with those ink cubes, where I have stamped these leaves and now I've squirted them with a bit of water, and so they sort of bleed a little bit into the paper, but they haven't bled too much, so it's actually quite a nice soft subtle effect on this page here. So now I've got some other leaves, and I'm just using I think it's the granny apple green, just in a few different spots, but not quite as bold, so they're just adding a little bit more interest in there around the edges. So anyway, we do hear lots of beautiful birdsong, but in some mornings I just lie in bed and I do think about it, but more often than not I don't take any mind or notice it at all. So I'm using this bird's eye view stamp as well, which had some cute little birds on it, and it's probably one of the first sort of sets I purchased when joining Stampin' up last year, and I've used it a few times. It's been used on some cute little bookmarks. They're just nice little birds, and I figure that it fits with this, and there were 2 little pre-cut ones in there from a previous project, which is quite handy. I am just going to use some StazOn ink because I'm going to use my blender markers to colour them in, so I just want something that's going to some ink that's sort of going to hold without bleeding as well. So I've chosen to do the birds that I didn't already have stamped and coloured that were in the box. It was a nice wee surprise to find those tucked in there. And just a couple more of the little birds because they hadn't been coloured or stamped there as well. And now it's time to sort of choose some of the colours that I'm going to colour these in with. and I pull some of those out. I end up using, I think, strawberry slush, a bit of cloud cover, a little bit of timid tiger, and a little bit of yellow, and then at the end I pull out some pretty in pink to do a few more colours. So I'm just going to colour one or two here, and then I will do the rest off camera. So this is the timid tiger, and I'm just going to start colouring in this one here. So using the darker colour on the outside edge and then bringing in that lighter colour just sort of brings the colours in, but adds a little bit of depth to the edges of it. So I'm going to go ahead and colour in the rest of these, and then I'm going to fussy cut them. There is, well, I don't have a die or anything that goes with this, so they do rely on a little bit of fussy cutting. However, that's okay. I have scissors, I have hands, I can cut things. So instead of sort of having that nice neat edge, these take on that rough, not rough, they don't have quite as neat a finish as the die cuts do. And I'll cut the rest of these off screen as well. And here we have all of those birds coloured and cut out, the ones I want to use, and I'm going to just sort of cluster them around that left hand edge to create a little bit of frame. And so I'm going to put, at this point I'm still sort of thinking I'm going to pop my journaling in the middle there, and I do put some there, but I end up using that right hand page, and you'll see that come together a little bit shortly. So I'm just going to stick these birds down, and I'm just using the paper glue. Now I do have to sort of weight this page a little bit once it's done, just to make sure all of those birds have stuck down, because the paper is a little bit lighter than the cardstock that I've done the birds on and stuck on top, so I may have to back the paper in the journal when I come to use the other side of it. And I found these little die cuts in my little box of goodies that you saw me use in one of the previous videos, and I decided to pull a few out that fit, and I've got just this feather and this little sort of file tab piece here, and I am going to sort of add a few more bits and pieces to that. Now you saw here that I've weighted with those ink pads just to hold down some of those birds, and now I'm using that smaller piece of leaf foliage with that same granny apple green just onto the die cut tab, and that will add a little bit of a connection from the left page to the right. So I'm just popping in here what I said before about the birds and how I sort of take for granted most of the time that they are here, when I did miss them when we first moved here. We'd lived in a house that had quite an established garden, and the birds were everywhere, down by a river as well. So again, we just had lots of that sound, but when we moved here, it wasn't here for quite a while. And then it was, I think one day I sort of woke up and it was like, wow, I can hear the birds. So that was kind of cool. And so just attaching that feather a little bit more with the ribbon and bringing that down. Now the green on the right hand side page from the Turtley Cute, it just felt a little bit too bold, so I pulled in a doily that I had sort of sitting nearby, and I kind of like bringing in a little bit of that natural softness with the doily. However, I still felt that that greeny colour was just a bit too dominant, so I'm using some of the white Stampin' Up ink here, and I am just using a big bold brush just to lighten or just add a little bit more interest, texture, but to soften that green essentially, so it's not so dominating on your eye when you look at it, and just smearing some of that across and sort of making sure that that fills up quite a bit of the page. So yeah, I just used a wide brush here and wondered whether I could get away without the doily, but I decided I do want that in there. And so now I'm going to use the green Tombow to on the back of that tab, and I'm going to just stick that down onto the fabric. It seems to be quite a good glue for holding on to some of these different materials when it's not just paper to paper. So I've used it quite successfully, and it seems to have stuck for a long time on there. So here's essentially the page, but I'm going to add the Bible verse, which I think is Psalm 150 verse 3, let everything that has breath praise the Lord, on the left hand side. So I use just the Stampin' Right marker here to pop that in. Now this one is getting a little bit older, so I do end up going over the top of this with another marker that I had, which is exactly the same, except it's not losing its colour quite so much. Hey, if you've stayed to the end, thanks for watching.